Veteran stops by an animal shelter because of an unusual barking sound. Inside the kennel, the burnt gold German Shepherd is slamming itself against the walls as if fleeing something not of this world. But when the veteran pauses in front of the cage, the dog's panicked eyes suddenly soften, almost as if it recognizes him. It lasts only a moment, yet it freezes Martin in place because nothing about this reaction feels random. That brief connection is enough for Martin to understand one terrifying truth. This dog isn't vicious at all. It's carrying a secret. And somewhere out there in the storm, someone is trying to erase every trace of that secret. Please support us by subscribing to the channel. Summer settled over Boise in a dry, shimmering haze, the kind of heat that pressed low over rooftops and sent waves of dusty warmth rolling between the buildings. Martin Hale, 55 years old, tall and lean, with a weather-cut face and a scar along his left jaw, walked slowly along the sun-bleached sidewalk, his collar pulled up not against cold, but against the relentless glare. His short graying hair caught the harsh afternoon light, and his gray plaid shirt, faded from years of repetition, peeked from beneath his old jacket that hung loosely despite the heat. He had returned to Boise not because he wanted to, but because his therapist insisted he reconnect with something that wasn't a battlefield or a memory. His boots struck the pavement with the steady rhythm of a man who had learned to march through pain, not around it. The city might have known him once as a mechanic, a neighbor, a friend, but now he was a stranger to every window he passed and every reflection he saw. He was headed toward a small auto shop on the corner of Grove Street, a place run by an old friend, one of the few people who still bothered to leave a voicemail when Martin didn't answer. He had been out of the military for years, yet his posture carried that rigid awareness, the kind of presence that made space for itself without asking. Therapy had taught him to recognize when his thoughts drifted into old trenches. But on days like this, when the sky glowed too bright and the air smelled like hot metal, he felt those trenches press closer. A sudden sharp sound cut through the heavy stillness, a single high-pitched bark that sliced across the baking street. Martin stopped mid-step. It wasn't an ordinary bark. It had the jagged edge of panic, the kind he'd heard from military working dogs when something was wrong. Heat shimmered around him as he slowly turned his head toward the Ada County Animal Rescue Facility. The squat gray building stood beneath flickering exterior lights warped by the sun, but the noise coming from inside didn't waver. It scraped. Martin moved toward the entrance, boots kicking up bits of gravel. The instinct to keep walking burned at the back of his mind, an old voice whispering not to get involved, not to risk unraveling the fragile stability he'd barely regained. But the bark came again, sharper, desperate, and he felt his body turn before he consciously chose to. Inside the lobby, the air smelled of disinfectant, warm fur, and the faint metallic tang of overheated vents. Fluorescent lights buzzed with a faint static hum. Behind the counter stood Sarah Reeves, a woman in her early 30s with tall, narrow shoulders and a long chestnut ponytail pulled tight against her back. Her face was pale with frustration and worry, her brown eyes shifting nervously between a clipboard and the hallway. She had the look of someone who carried compassion like armor, patched, dented, still holding. When she noticed Martin, surprise flickered across her features, quickly replaced by polite confusion. "Sir, can I help you?" she asked, voice steady but exhausted, the tone of someone who had said that sentence hundreds of times today. Martin adjusted his stance, aware of how people reacted to large men with stern faces and gravel-low voices. "I heard something," he said. "Sounded like trouble." Sarah exhaled as if relieved he wasn't there to surrender a pet. She gestured toward the hallway. "That's Blaze, new intake, male German Shepherd, 6, maybe 7 years old. Came in yesterday, already bit one of the volunteers. We're keeping distance until the director gets here." Her expression tightened. "He's different." Martin didn't respond. He knew too well how a single word like different could hide fear, uncertainty, or something no one wanted to face. He walked past her before she finished speaking, drawn by an instinct that rose too quickly to fight. The kennels were lined in 2 tight rows of steel, the air thick with the restless sounds of panting animals trying to escape the heat. But one sound stood apart, the rapid scratching of paws striking concrete, the metallic rattle of a body slamming into bars. When Martin reached the third kennel on the left, he stopped cold. The dog, Blaze as Sarah called him, was a burnt gold German Shepherd with a lean, muscular frame and a coat dulled by stress rather than neglect. His ears were pinned flat, his breath coming in sharp bursts, and his eyes, Wide, glassy, consumed by a terror Martin recognized too easily. Blaze lunged at the door again, snarling, but something was wrong with the way he moved. It wasn't aggression, it was desperation, a frantic attempt to escape an invisible threat. Then Martin saw it, a circular scar on the dog's front leg, faint but unmistakably patterned, like the pressure mark left from specialized tactical gear. The mark worn by dogs who had completed advanced military training years ago. The type of training reserved for missions no one talked about. Blaze barked once, a sound that shattered into the hot, stale air like a warning flare. But when Martin stepped closer, the dog choked off mid-snarl. His muscles trembled. His eyes locked onto Martin's face with an abrupt recognition that chilled the veteran deeper than any winter wind. For a moment, neither moved. The hallway felt suspended, the lights humming louder as though listening. Blaze lowered his head, but not in submission, more like confusion, as though trying to trace a memory buried under fear. Sarah approached cautiously. "Sir, please stay back. He's unpredictable." Martin didn't step away. His heartbeat steadied, old instincts rising like dust from forgotten floors. He lowered his voice into the calm register handlers used in high-stress drills. "Easy," he whispered, not commanding but anchoring. Blaze's ears twitched. His scarred paw lifted slightly off the ground, wavering between fear and recognition. Something in the stillness unearthed a memory Martin had spent years trying to drown in routine and medication. A moment in a foreign desert. A dog's alert posture, a life-or-death instinct he had misread once and never forgiven himself for. "You're not attacking," he murmured. "You're running from something." Blaze backed away, tail low, but eyes still fixed on him, watching, pleading, warning. And as the quiet stretched tight between them, Martin realized the most frightening thing wasn't the dog's behavior. It was the familiar look in those amber eyes, the look of a survivor who had seen something he wasn't supposed to, something from 1974. The air seemed to thin. Sarah's footsteps halted behind him. The lights flickered again, and Blaze, trembling in the oily glow of the overhead bulbs, turned his head sharply toward the far end of the hallway, toward a shadow Martin hadn't noticed before, a shadow that was moving. And suddenly, Martin understood this was no ordinary rescue intake. Something, or someone, had followed Blaze here. The morning came with a gray, heavy stillness that seemed to press down on the Ada County shelter like a lingering hand. The storm from the night before had burned off sometime before dawn, leaving the streets coated not in ice but in a thin layer of dust and humidity that clung to windows and asphalt. The heat from yesterday still radiated off the sidewalks, turning the early hour into a quiet, suffocating haze. When Martin Hale stepped through the entrance, brushing the dried grit from the shoulders of his worn brown leather jacket, the silence inside was almost unnerving. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, their pale glow reflecting off the warm, slightly sticky concrete floors. Every footstep echoed, as if the building itself were hollow. He could already feel something was different, and the feeling settled into his chest like a weight he wasn't ready to name. He walked toward Blaze's kennel with a slow, steady stride. The German Shepherd was pressed into the farthest corner. His burnt gold fur bristled, his body trembling not from cold, but from something deeper, something internal. Blaze's amber eyes flicked toward the hallway door, then back to Martin. The dog didn't bark, didn't growl. He simply retreated an inch farther, as though expecting danger to come from behind Martin rather than from him. Sarah Reeves emerged from the side corridor shortly after. She looked as though she hadn't slept at all. Her tall, slender frame seemed more fragile today, her chestnut ponytail slightly frayed with strands falling around her flushed cheeks. Her warm brown eyes, usually gentle despite exhaustion, held a tightness now, a silent panic that swept across her features the moment she saw Blaze's reaction. "He's been like this since sunrise," she said, hugging a clipboard to her chest as if it were the only thing keeping her steady. Not a sound from him until someone walks by that door. Then he just freezes. Martin glanced toward the entrance Blaze kept staring at. Even from here, the air near the doorway felt different. Thicker, warmer, unnaturally still, like the heat from the night hadn't left. "Did he sleep at all?" Sarah shook her head. "Barely. Alan checked on him at 4, said he was awake, trembling. He wouldn't even touch his water." As if summoned by the sound of his name, Alan Brooks stepped into the hallway. He looked as solid and broad-shouldered as ever, his late 40s frame wrapped in a thick gray work jacket despite the summer heat. Old habit, perhaps, or a preference for layers. The trimmed salt and pepper beard on his jaw gave him a rugged, dependable air, but today his eyes were narrowed with unease. Years as a volunteer reserve deputy had taught him how to manage chaos, how to stay calm when everyone else fell apart, but even he seemed rattled. "He's scared of something," Alan muttered, arms crossed firmly over his jacket. "Something that didn't stay outside with last night's storm." His gravel-deep voice softened slightly as he approached the kennel. "You gotta wonder what he's seen." Martin watched Blaze carefully. The dog's ears twitched. His eyes darted to the box-shaped shadow under a nearby shelf. He seemed to recognize something there, or brace against it. Martin followed the direction of Blaze's gaze and then turned to Sarah. "You said he was found with items?" Sarah nodded immediately. "Yes, that box. Come on, I'll show you." She led Martin and Alan into the intake room. The space felt different without other staff moving through it. A single desk lamp cast a circle of warm light over a metal table, and on top of the table sat an old wooden box. The box was no larger than a shoebox, but the moment Martin saw it, he felt a shift in the room, like the heated air tightening before another storm breaks. The box was dark from age, its corners dented, its surface scarred. It looked as though it had been buried for decades, carried through years of dry summers and humid nights, then dragged into the open by something desperate. Even from where he stood, Martin could smell faint cedar and old earth, like forgotten storage in an abandoned attic. Alan tapped the box lightly. The officers who found Blaze said he was right beside it, wouldn't move, barked like hell whenever they got near. "How buried was it?" Martin asked. "Half covered in dirt," Alan replied, "like someone dropped it fast and ran." Sarah stepped closer to the table and unhooked the small brass latch with gentle fingers. The wood groaned with age when she opened it. Inside lay 3 items wrapped in a cloth, stiffened not from cold but from age and dust: a torn scrap of a map, a thin silver key, and a metal tag engraved with only one marking, 19 to 74. Martin lifted the map piece first. It was thick paper, old, yellowed at the edges, but the tear was fresh, like someone had ripped it in haste, not time. The fragment showed a sliver of topography, a river curve, faint mountain markers, but not enough to place the location. "Someone tore this apart," Martin murmured. Next he examined the silver key. It was delicate, lightweight, shaped for something small, not a house key, not a car key, something finer, older, made for a personal lockbox, not infrastructure. "Could be 40 years old," Alan said, leaning closer. "Maybe more." Finally, Martin picked up the metal tag. It was heavier than it looked, the engraving deep. 19 to 74 was not stylized like a date. There was no month, no date, no punctuation that hinted at time. It felt coded, military coded. The metal pressed into Martin's palm, and a memory flickered. A briefing years ago, a whispered reference to a project he had never been part of, a number that echoed in dusty corners of classified reports. But the memory was too faint, too buried to grasp fully. Sarah exhaled shakily. "We can't find any owner information. No microchip, no records, nothing." She looked toward the hallway where Blaze remained. "It's like he appeared out of nowhere." Martin closed the box slowly. The latch clicked with a soft metallic sigh. The world seemed to draw closer around them as he set the box back on the table. "He wasn't abandoned," Martin said finally. "He was left." Alan frowned. "Left? With this?" Martin nodded. "And whatever this leads to," Sarah's voice lowered. "Do you think someone's looking for him?" Martin's jaw tightened, scar catching the light of the desk lamp. "No, not someone looking for a lost dog." He stepped back, gaze fixed on the box. "Someone trying to erase whatever he remembers." From the hallway, a soft whine carried through the door. Blaze. It wasn't fear now, it was a plea. Martin turned toward the sound, something heavy settling into his stomach. Blaze hadn't survived by accident. He hadn't been found by chance. And the items in the wooden box weren't clues. They were warnings. Warnings from 1974. The streets of Boise had taken on that strange, muted glow that always followed a hard summer storm. The kind of half-light that made the world feel suspended between night and morning. Martin Hale pulled his collar higher around his neck as he stepped out of the shelter, the lingering heat slipping beneath the worn edges of his brown leather jacket like an unwelcome whisper. The sidewalks were still damp from the downpour, shimmering faintly under the early light, unmarred except for the steady line of Martin's boot prints. A lonely trail stretching back toward Grove Street. The city was unusually still, too quiet even for the thick summer air, and Martin found himself glancing over his shoulder more than once as he walked. Old instincts had a way of clawing back to the surface when something in the atmosphere shifted. He wasn't halfway down the block when he felt it, the prickling sensation of being watched. It crept along the back of his neck, tightening the scarred muscles along his jaw. Martin slowed his pace, letting his breath steady, allowing his peripheral vision to widen the way it once had under the unforgiving pressure of foreign deserts. He didn't turn his head. Turning signaled fear, awareness, vulnerability. Instead, he angled his path slightly and used the reflection in a darkened storefront window to scan behind him. A tall figure stood across the street, half obscured by the warm haze rising from the rain-soaked asphalt. The man's posture was unnervingly still, boots planted firmly, shoulders squared, the long line of a dark wool coat cutting a vertical silhouette into the humid morning air. He wore a wide-brimmed black hat that dipped low enough to cast a shadow across the upper half of his face, hiding everything except the harsh line of a pale, clean-shaven jaw. What froze Martin was not the man's presence, but his action. The stranger didn't watch Martin. He was studying the ground, more specifically, Martin's footprints. The man crouched with a slow, deliberate motion, tracing one of the damp prints with a gloved finger, as though comparing it to something only he could see. Drops of residual rain slid from the brim of his hat, but he didn't brush them away. He didn't rush. He examined. And that was what set every alarm inside Martin ringing. Only people trained to follow without being seen examined movement, not individuals. Martin shifted his path again, crossing the street diagonally as if simply adjusting course. Each step was measured, controlled, yet when he finally allowed himself to glance toward where the man had been, the figure was no longer crouching. He was standing tall, watching. The brim of the hat tipped just enough to reveal a flash of something in the stranger's eyes, cold calculation, before the man turned and walked away with calm, controlled strides, disappearing behind the rising curtain of steam lifting from the wet pavement. Martin did not follow. There was no use chasing. Shadows. Not without a weapon, not without a plan. And the part of him that had been trained to survive wars knew better than to pursue a threat that made itself known voluntarily. That was never an accident. That was a message. He walked home with a heaviness that seemed to drag each step deeper into the humid air. Sleep did not come easy, and when it finally did, it arrived twisted by fragmented memories and the faint glow of a number stamped into cold metal, 19 to 74. He was back at the shelter the next morning before sunrise. The wind had calmed overnight, but the leftover heat had intensified, turning every metal surface into a warm, humid film, and every breath into a brief haze. As soon as he stepped through the door, he knew something was wrong. Sarah Reeves was speaking with two sheriff's deputies near the front desk, her tall, slender frame stiff with unease. Her chestnut ponytail, usually tied neatly, was frazzled, and strands fell around her flushed cheeks. Her warm brown eyes were sharp with fear as she turned toward Martin. Martin! There was a break-in. He felt his stomach tighten. What was taken? Sarah swallowed, fingers gripping her clipboard so tightly her knuckles whitened. Only one thing, the wooden box from intake. Before Martin could respond, Alan Brooks stepped out of the office behind her. His broad shoulders seemed heavier today. The salt and pepper beard around his jawline bristled with frustration. Alan had always been the shelter's quiet anchor, the man who steadied others when chaos surged. But now even he looked unnerved. They didn't break any other locks, Alan said, voice gravel deep with anger. Didn't touch the register, the meds, the equipment. They cut the security feed cleanly. They went straight for that box. Martin's pulse thudded once, hard. The map, the key, the tag. Someone knew what they were looking for. Saw the cameras? He asked. One of the deputies said the feed didn't just get cut, Alan replied. It was looped. Sarah's eyebrows knit together. Looped like professionally? Exactly that, Alan said with a grim nod. Martin turned toward the hallway. The air felt different now, tense, charged, as though every shadow held a message he couldn't yet read. When he reached Blaze's kennel, the German shepherd was already waiting for him. Blaze stood near the gate, not pressed into the corner in fear, not snarling, but simply watching. The dog's amber eyes lifted to Martin's face with a steady, exhausted recognition. No barking, no growling, just a quiet plea. Martin crouched to meet the dog's gaze, his worn brown leather jacket creasing as he moved. Blaze's burnt gold coat was duller than yesterday, his body still trembling from the storm or the memories it awakened. Slowly, the dog pressed his nose through the bars. Sarah stood a few feet back, her expression softening into cautious awe. "He hasn't done that with anyone," she whispered. "Not once." Alan crossed his arms. "Whatever's going on, he trusts you, or he remembers you." Martin rested his hand against the warm steel bars, feeling Blaze's breath fill the space between them with a trembling heat. "They came for the box," Martin said quietly, "and they'll come again." Blaze's scarred paw lifted slightly, hovering, trembling, before settling gently against the inside of the gate. He wasn't pushing, he wasn't pawing, he was choosing. Sarah's voice was barely audible. "Martin, what do we do now?" He stood slowly, his posture shifting into something colder, older, a part of himself he thought he had buried the day he retired. He looked down the hallway where Blaze had once barked at a shadow, trembling with instinctive fear. Now, Martin felt the shadow moving too. "We prepare," he said. Somewhere in Boise, a man in a black hat was already following the trail, and Blaze wasn't the object he wanted. He was the witness he needed to erase. The storm arrived with the kind of fury Boise only saw every few years. Rain hammering the streets in a restless torrent, thunder rolling across the sky like the cracking of a vast iron sheet. The Ada County shelter rattled beneath the force of it, the thin metal frames of the windows trembling as wind clawed at every seam. Martin Hale had returned just in time to help the staff secure the back vents and reinforce the kennel latches, but even he felt the strange pressure in the air, a tension that crawled under the skin like a warning. He moved down the hallway with calm urgency, the worn brown leather jacket clinging to his shoulders with damp humidity, his weathered face set in tight concentration. Blaze's kennel was his destination. He knew before he arrived that something was wrong. Blaze was circling the narrow space, not pacing but spiraling in frantic, uneven loops. His burnt gold coat stood bristled along his spine, paws scuffing the concrete in sharp, desperate clicks. Every crack of thunder sent a violent tremor through the dog's body, as if the sound triggered something buried deep within him. Blaze didn't bark. He didn't snarl. He only moved as though trying to escape a memory he didn't want to see. The scar on his leg twitched with each shudder. Sarah Reeves rushed into the hallway, her tall, slender frame tense with panic. Rain clung to her dark blue summer jacket, and her chestnut ponytail was damp from the storm tearing across the back of the building. Her flushed cheeks glistened with humidity and fright, and her warm brown eyes seemed darker in the flickering fluorescent light. "It started the moment the thunder hit," she said, voice thin. "He's reacting to something we can't hear." She crouched near the cage with trembling hands. "It's like he's tracking a sound inside the storm." Martin stepped beside her, lowering himself near the gate so Blaze could see him clearly. The German shepherd locked onto him instantly, amber eyes wide and wild, tail low and rigid. "He's remembering something," Martin murmured, the words almost lost in the rumbling storm. He reached out but didn't touch the bars, letting his presence alone serve as an anchor. Then thunder cracked again, louder, sharper, too close. The entire row of kennels shook. Above them, the aging ventilation system groaned under the sudden shift in humid pressure. Martin looked up just as a rusted latch gave way. The metal panel above Blaze snapped open violently, spraying dust and damp air into the hallway. Blaze reacted before either of them could shout. The dog launched upward, claws scraping metal, muscles tightening with raw instinct. Blaze hooked onto the lower edge of the vent and pulled himself through the narrow opening with terrifying speed. "Blaze!" Sarah shouted, stumbling backward. "Damn it!" Martin surged to his feet and sprinted down the hallway. He pushed through the shelter's exit and into the storm. Rain slashed across his face like heated needles, the wind so strong it nearly knocked him sideways. His boots splashed deep into growing puddles, illuminated by flickering streetlights. He fought his way behind the generator shed where the vents led. One metal panel hung loose, half buried in wet grass and blown debris. But Blaze was gone. Not a single track remained. The summer storm was erasing the world as quickly as it reshaped it. For a moment, Martin stood still, breathing hard, letting the storm's howl roar past him. Then something sharper, something familiar, cut through the noise. Memory, the torn map, the contour lines, the faint outline that had nagged at him since he'd seen it. Ann Morrison Park. Abandoned maintenance tunnels from the 1970s. Rumors of sealed-off chambers, unless someone had unsealed one. Martin climbed into his truck and drove through the storm, the wipers struggling to clear the windshield fast enough. Rain sheeted across the road like flowing silver, headlights reflecting a world reduced to a swirling tunnel of water and lightning. He followed instinct more than visibility. The park's entrance appeared out of the storm like a fading ghost, lamplight bending through the curtain of falling rain. He stepped out into the park, boots sinking into thick, waterlogged grass. The storm roared around him, wind threading between trees with a sound like whispering voices. Martin scanned the open field, the river bend swelling under the storm surge, the silhouette of the old pump station. And then he heard it, a faint whimper. He followed the sound through the storm, steps heavy, breath burning against humid air. Near a mound of storm-soaked earth, piled against a rusted metal hatch in the ground, he found Blaze. The dog stood trembling, drenched, tail low, chest heaving with fear and determination. Blaze wasn't running anymore. He was guarding something. Martin approached slowly, careful not to spook him. Blaze looked over his shoulder, eyes wide with warning but also relief. The dog stepped forward just long enough to press his soaked head briefly against Martin's thigh, a gesture of trust born in crisis, before turning back to the hatch. A sound rose from below, metal against metal, a scraping twist, the unmistakable click of someone working on a lock. Martin froze, breath steadying, instincts sharpening like a drawn blade. His scar burned, not with cold this time, but with the electric sting of humid storm air. "Someone's down there," he whispered. The storm howled, the hatch trembled, and Martin understood. The man in the black hat hadn't been following him. He had been following the map, following Blaze. And Blaze, through fear, memory, or training, had come here not to escape. He had come to warn him. Rain hammered against the metal hatch as Martin Hale brushed it clean with his gloved hands. Warm mist rising from the soaked ground around him. Blaze stood beside him, the burnt gold German shepherd trembling not with fear this time, but with urgency, ears pinned forward toward the grinding noise beneath them. Martin gripped the rusted handles, muscles tightening beneath his worn brown leather jacket as summer thunder rolled overhead. With one hard pull, the hatch groaned and lifted, unleashing a wave of humid, stale air from the darkness below. A faint bulb flickered somewhere underground, revealing a narrow staircase carved from aging concrete. Martin descended carefully, boots scraping damp echoes into the hollow chamber. Blaze followed, tail low but eyes fixed ahead. The air smelled of rust, wet stone, and something older, something left behind. At the bottom, the narrow tunnel opened into a small room barely larger than a storage closet. The cement walls were cracked with age, moisture beading along the surface and dripping intermittently. Dust clung in clumps, thickened by humidity. In the center, illuminated by a single flickering light, the man in the black hat stood hunched over a large steel safe bolted to the ground. The tall figure wore the same long, dark coat as before, shoulders angled sharply, every movement deliberate. His face remained hidden beneath the brim of his hat, pale jaw tight with focus. His gloved hands worked meticulously at the lock, small metal tools glinting faintly as he twisted and probed at the mechanism. Martin recognized the symbol etched into the safe's front panel, a circle bisected by a thin vertical line, the same design engraved on the metal tag inside the wooden box. 1974, he muttered, the number no longer cryptic. A heavy realization tightened inside him. This wasn't a coincidence. This is one of theirs. The man in the black hat froze. Slowly he lifted his head. Martin still couldn't see his eyes, only the shadows obscuring them. "You shouldn't be here," the man said, voice low and taut, tinged with a calmness that sounded practiced, conditioned. His posture straightened with military precision. Before Martin could respond, Blaze lunged forward with sudden force. The German shepherd planted himself between Martin and the intruder, teeth bared but silent, muscles coiled in protective instinct. It was the first time Blaze had moved without trembling, the first time he didn't retreat. Whatever memory had been haunting him was gone, now replaced by purpose. The stranger stepped back slowly, hands raised. "That animal wasn't supposed to survive," he said quietly. His tone was cold but not hateful, more like someone speaking a fact he didn't enjoy delivering. None of them were. Martin's pulse thudded hard. "Who are you?" The man hesitated before answering. "Someone who cleans up the past." His gaze flickered briefly to Blaze. "And he's part of a project that should have stayed buried." Martin stepped forward, scar on his left jawline catching the dim, flickering light. "You're from the program," he said. "From the research unit." The man's silence was confirmation enough. Before anything else could unfold, Blaze moved with sudden violence. The dog lunged, not to attack, but to breathe to drive the man further away from the safe. The stranger stumbled backward, colliding with a metal shelf. Tools clattered. The flickering light swayed violently. Martin raised both hands, prepared for a fight despite the years since he'd last stood in a combat stance. But sirens pierced the silence above them, muffled through layers of concrete, distant at first, then growing sharper. The sheriff's department had arrived. Heavy boots and shouted commands echoed toward the stairwell. The man in the black hat straightened, tension rippling through his long coat. For the first time, Martin saw his eyes, cold, intelligent, and filled with the weary resignation of someone who had spent too long cleaning up secrets that refused to stay hidden. Without another word, he bolted toward a secondary tunnel exit at the back of the chamber, slipping through the darkness before authorities could reach him. Deputies flooded into the room moments later, flashlights slicing through dust-thick, humid air. One of them, Deputy Karen Malloy, a stern woman in her early 40s with a square jaw and dark hair tied tightly beneath her summer patrol cap, took immediate command. Her Navy sheriff's jacket and heavy-duty belt marked her presence with authority. Karen's eyes, sharp and analytical, swept quickly across the scene. "Hands where I can see them," she ordered reflexively, before recognizing Martin from the shelter's earlier report. Her posture softened, but her tone remained firm. "You're the one who called this in?" Martin stepped aside, motioning to the safe. The intruder just fled through that tunnel. Two deputies sprinted after him, while Karen approached the safe, slowly. Blaze stayed close to Martin, body pressed against his leg in silent affirmation. Karen tilted her head at the symbol on the safe. "Never seen a design like this. Looks government-made. Old, though." "Try opening it," Martin said. Using a crowbar, a deputy pried open the already damaged lock. The metal groaned, and the door finally swung outward with a harsh scrape. Inside were only two items: a stack of burnt research documents, edges charred and fragile, and a thin roster sheet printed on yellowing paper. Karen lifted the roster, squinting at the faded writing. "Looks like a list of animals, codes, handlers, genetic markers." Her voice trailed off as she reached the final name. "This one. It says Canine Unit 12, Sire, Aries." Blaze stiffened at the sound of the name, as if the syllables stirred something deep. Martin took the paper from Karen, tracing the ink with a shaking fingertip. "Aries," he repeated softly. "His father." The burnt gold dog whined, amber eyes shifting between the paper and Martin's face. For the first time, the panic that had defined Blaze's existence seemed to melt into something else. Recognition, connection, maybe even peace. Karen folded her arms. "Whatever this project was, it wasn't legal." Martin nodded slowly. "And someone came back to erase it." Outside, the summer storm had begun to weaken. Rain softened into a steady drizzle, drops clinging to Martin's jacket as he and Blaze emerged from the underground chamber. Deputies moved around them, securing the site. Blaze stayed pressed to Martin's side the entire walk back to the truck, no longer trembling. By the time evening settled over Boise, paperwork had been filed, statements taken, and the sheriff's office, having determined Blaze needed responsible custody, granted Martin temporary ownership. The final signature came from Sarah Reeves herself, her warm brown eyes shining with relief when Martin confirmed he would take Blaze home. As they stepped outside the shelter, warm summer air thick with the smell of rain, Blaze nudged Martin's hand gently, almost gratefully. Martin rested his palm on the dog's head, feeling the solid life beneath the burnt gold coat. Blaze had never been astray. He had never been dangerous. He had been carrying memories that weren't his to carry. Echoes of a forgotten program, a buried experiment, a legacy of survival passed through blood instead of time. Summer in Boise slowly calmed. Streets dried, clouds thinned, and the world brightened one warm morning at a time. And when Martin walked out of the shelter for the final time with Blaze trotting proudly beside him, he felt something shift inside him, a weight he had carried for years loosening, replaced by something smaller, gentler. Two lives once fractured by the past had found each other in the heat. Not as remnants of forgotten stories, but as two souls finally stepping into a life where neither had to survive alone. In the quiet that followed, Martin often thought about how unlikely this journey had been. A terrified dog in a sweltering shelter room, a veteran carrying wounds no one could see, and a secret buried for half a century. Some people would call it coincidence, but others might call it something closer to a miracle. Because sometimes God doesn't speak through thunder or blazing suns in the sky. Sometimes he speaks through the small things, a bark in the dark, a trail of footprints left on warm pavement, a life that crosses ours at the exact moment we need it most. And maybe that is the reminder we all carry into our own days, that even in the hottest and heaviest seasons of our lives, we are never as alone as we think. That hope can arrive quietly, faithfully, in ways we never expect. And that healing often begins not with answers, but with the courage to open the next door. If this story touched you in any way, we invite you to share it with someone who might need a little light today. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your stories matter more than you know. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next journey of faith, courage, and second chances. May God bless you, keep you safe, and guide you gently through every storm yet to come.